start the webinar. So welcome everybody to SaaS Camp by Vendor Capital. We are super excited to have today Kasper Hulthin. By the way, am I butchering that name? Am I saying that right? How do you say your last name?
Hulthin. You did quite well.
Hulthin. Okay. All right. Very good. I don't want to offend anybody every time I say their name, but good. So Kasper will be here over talking about the different phases of building the leadership team and structuring the org chart and the changing role of founders as you develop the company over time. And this is really one of the key elements that you have to get right or you have to die trying. It's actually reminds me a little bit of the ice hockey championship game, which happened yesterday between Finland and Canada, where a seemingly on paper much weaker Finnish team was able to beat a Canadian team packed with superstars like Nathan McKinnon and Sidney Crosby, but they did it by working as a unit. So and that's really what you were trying to build here in the startup teams. But this session is really to get the brain fog cleared from anyone who's listening on how to build the org and how to approach it when you're going from a founder-only team to hundreds of people, tens or hundreds of people. And I suppose speaking of brain fog, I'm a little jet lagged right now because and I'm using my favorite drink here to combat the adverse effects of that, but I just came back from SaaS Annual yesterday, and it's probably the largest SaaS-focused conference on the planet, organized by the grandfather of SaaS himself, Jason Lemkin. But the main theme and talk in town, as you can imagine, is AI. So later on, perhaps I want to tie AI into this a little bit, sharing some thoughts from there as well. But stay tuned for more on that. But SaaS Camp was originally started in 2020 with COVID hitting all of the world and people having to stay in their own apartments and basements to do most of their work. But we really wanted to still give everybody, the founders especially, an opportunity to get access to some of the playbooks and insights from the top operators. And we've had people from people like Lars Nordvall from Neo4j joined us, who's their sales lead. Johanna Smoro, who's a founder from Relax, for instance. Yevgeny Kabanov held a really amazing talk on running product at Bolt. And then we also had Fredrik Skanse, who's the CEO of Funnel, talking about the go-to-market playbooks. And lots of some of really the great operators in the industry in our region, especially, who we wanted to bring along to these sessions. And Kasper is definitely nothing short of that group. So just to give a quick rundown of who he is, he's actually a startup wizard, how you named him over here, who's built some of your favorite SaaS tools. He, for instance, co-founded Podio, and I remember when Podio came out, it was really a transformative tool for me myself. I even built CRM in a couple of companies with that. So really a great tool back then for us to or basically just redefining how teams collaborate. And Peakon, he also built or co-founded, which is a platform where pretty much made employee feedback actually useful. So both of these were snapped up in a multi-million-dollar exit by Citrix and Workday later on. But now he's channeling his powers really into investing through Future 5 and Cost Capital, and he's really trying to back the world changers in climate, food, and educations, and with companies such as Normative and B Makers. And we like to say in Finnish that he's got his fingers in many soups nowadays, and that's his way of giving back to the community after his successful exit. So really great to have you here, Kasper. And I know this was a very condensed intro into your 15 years of tech career, but is there something that I missed there?
Thank you very much, Timo. No, I think you got it pretty well covered. I always tell myself that this is going to be the last project, and my wife
That's right.
never believes me. So there's probably a few things missing in there, but the overarching is true.
Right. Very good. So you can fill those up then. But as a housekeeping item, so I hope that all of you will join in the conversation, and feel free to kind of put anything in the chat, and Taro in the back office will highlight those for us, and we'll bring those questions or comments into the conversation as well as we go along. So happy to have your questions that come up in your mind or that are burning right now in terms of these topics of building or how the leadership team evolves over time, and what do you feel like is still unknown for you in terms of what will happen in the future as your company develops. So feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll take those on at the appropriate moments. But I think without further ado, I think Kasper, feel free to go into perhaps a little bit on your background as well, and kind of start us off with the topic, the theme of the day.
Thank you very much, and thanks for joining, everyone. And as Timo said, this is only going to be more fun for me and everyone around here if you put some questions in. So please do, and I don't know if you can interrupt, but I'm happy to take an interruption if it's possible. This is obviously sort of my version of our story, and I think it aligns with the rest of the team's version. But there's many ways for great leadership. So I thought we could run through a little bit of the journey and take this as a topic along. I'm a very, very big believer in people creating businesses. And given during my career, it has been the case as well. So maybe sort of not going all the way back to the beginning, but as Timo said, I've been in entrepreneur for a while. I studied at Copenhagen Business School, more to say that I'm the commercial guy. I'm not the programmer. I started a couple of things right out of Copenhagen Business School, and I usually refer to them as my non-intentional non-profits. We've all been there, and maybe you need to be there in terms of leadership. One of them definitely became so because we were not the right leadership team. We were a group of 4, and the CEO probably wasn't the right thing, so it ended up sort of dissolving the company. Then I usually say my best decision business-wise was to start my first company, and the second best was to close it. And then after we've done that, I met 2 guys on the other side of the street. We were in a small basement in Copenhagen, and another 2 guys was in the basement across the street, and they said, "Why don't you come and join us?" And I thought, yeah, why not? I think I've had a job for a month or so, and that's about it for my entire career. But I actually had a job, and they were really cool. Like, there were 3 guys in the basement, and very early days in this whole SaaS world, and the vision was to put the power back to the people actually doing the job, meaning creating software that was possible to built by people without doing code, processes that could be adapted to the way you are working, and not how SharePoint or your other IT systems were set up. So essentially, the sort of initial no-code thing, which is nowadays become very popular. Again, that's the other way you can feel you've been around for a while. You start seeing sort of fashion coming full circle. But that became Podio. But more to say, we were 4 guys in a basement in Copenhagen with very little money, and a big vision to create something, competitive to Microsoft or whatever the likes. And I don't know how well you know Copenhagen, but when you do that, it's not, I guess it's similar in Finland. people are going a little bit, really. We needed an investor and ended up finding a CEO and investor called Tommy Ahlers. And I think that may be the first learning which is I was the CEO originally, and I could have insisted in being that, but I knew that Tommy was going to take the business to another level than what I was able to do at that time. And he did, and it works. And I'm pretty sure Tommy was part. It wasn't only Tommy, but Tommy as part of the team. So you can say that the most important hire I did in Podio very early days was actually hiring another CEO than myself. And having seen this for many years to come afterwards, I think there is some founders that typically put themselves as the bar of the company. I'm not saying you should all go out and hire someone else than yourself, but I do think it's important to sort of think big, particularly in terms of leadership. The next couple of people we hired, we had
actually on that topic. I mean, so that is super interesting because that doesn't happen that often. That you as a founder are able to kind of, to some extent, get over yourself and realize that you're perhaps not the right or the best person to run the company, and there might be somebody else that might be more capable of doing that. How did you, just kind of getting into your mindset back then, how did you come to the conclusion that there might be somebody that might be better for this, or and was it because of that you were able to find Tommy and get him to join, or did it kind of happen in the other way where you met with him and you felt like he was taking interest into Podio and you felt like he would be somebody who could lead it better than you?
Yeah, I think it was probably happened in the process a little bit. As you said, we were looking for investors. Tommy came on the table as one investor, and we liked him. But clearly, if he was to invest, Tommy had sold a company to Vodafone at the time, and was about to leave that. So he was not only looking to do an angel investment, also kind of looking to do his new gig. So we agreed that would be super interesting to do that. And I don't know if it was. I mean, nowadays, after rationalization, it was very deliberate choice and I thought it through a lot. I'm pretty sure at the time it was a lot less deliberate, but it was quite a bit. I mean, we were 4 guys in a basement office, and we had the toilet didn't work, so we borrowed the key to the upstairs neighbor so we could go and use her toilet while she was at work. And Tommy came and just did a big exit and came in his suit and a big BMW, and like, wow. So it was definitely a different kind of company. And what happened though was that Tommy, we then agreed, let's hire a CTO. And again, we were these 4 guys in a basement, but we were like, we need the best in Europe. So we had 2 guys flying in for the job at the time. The first guy was oh no, I forget the name. Andreas, who was the original CTO at Spotify, flew in, and we had dinner with him. Fantastic, smart guy. The other guy was Phil Chambers, who had been the CTO at a few things in the UK and other things. And we also took a night out with Phil, and Phil ended up falling asleep on my shoulder on the way home in the taxi. So I thought, that's a guy you can trust. No, Phil is a super smart guy, and we ended up going with Phil. I don't know if Andreas would have said yes to it, but more to say, tiny small team in a basement in Copenhagen. The only thing we had was a big vision, and we still attracted what I think at the time was probably 2 of the very best CTOs in all of Europe. And Phil moved from Berlin to Copenhagen to come work for us. And I think that partly was because we just kept raising the bar on people. We hired a fantastic senior or like chief architect, which later on became the CTO. and then because we had these people coming from abroad, we started hiring like a designer and the first head of CS and so forth coming in. So Podio to a large degree became almost more cult than culture. And this was like early days, right? Like you added one feature and VentureBeat or whatever the media was called back then, TechCrunch, they would do like a full article. Podio just released a like button or whatever. It's like nowadays, obviously, would mean nothing. So it was super cool time to do SaaS because everything was hyped. We ended up launching in San Francisco, to come back to your San Fran beginning here. And we were about 20 people. We didn't want to be the European version of anything, so we went kind of straight to the lion's nest in San Francisco. At the time, you had Facebook was sort of getting really big. The whole photo sharing was the AI at that time. So how do you make an appearance as a small Danish company doing like a workflow tool where you can build your own apps? So we ended up renting a space on Fifth Street, which for those that don't know San Francisco very well is probably the least place or the last place you would ever rent somewhere in San Francisco. We went to South by Southwest the week before and did like a kind of a promo event for this, and then we brought the whole team to San Francisco and stood outside of Twitter and Facebook and whatever headquarters and handed out flyers. We had booked like an old art gallery, which we turned into like a real life app store where people could come in and build their own apps on Podio. And the night we opened, I think we had live. I can't remember if TechCrunch or one of the other that was kind of live streaming the launch, and I think we had 300-400 people lining up outside, which was completely crazy for a small Danish company. But it actually made some sort of thing, and I think that whole idea of the sort of ambition being raised all the time, which was not a natural thing in Copenhagen. Basically, there wasn't many at the time doing it, and that was all people driven. That was Tommy raising the bar a little bit, Phil raising it more, Christian raising it more, and so forth, and obviously our board and the people around us. So it was a fantastic trip. Obviously, we couldn't just leave San Francisco, so we had a board call, and I raised my hand and agreed to stay, and went to Bed and Beyond and bought a couple of mattresses and a and a pillow, and then I lived in San Francisco. Called my mom and say, now I live in San Francisco. And opened the office there, which was essentially the back room of the shop we had. Was complete chaos, but quite fun. And a year later, Citrix acquired the business. Citrix at the time had a very, very big SaaS company, I think nearing like 1 billion in ARR with the go-to products. Now they're all gone because we tried to tell them that the new thing was, not Cisco and WebEx. I think we even built them soon, but that's a story for another day. So spent a couple of years in San Francisco, came back again, and then if we keep going around leadership team, then we started what became Peakon. But the origin story is actually that we started with the leadership team. So me, Phil, Christian, who was part of the Podio leadership team, and then a fourth guy, Dan Rogers, got together and decided that we wanted to create a company we actually wanted to work for. That was the origin idea, but obviously you need something to put on the shelves. That's hard to sell. And we had been sort of walking around a lot of ideas for a while. And at the end, we decided we rented a summer house somewhere here in Denmark, and we brought all our ideas and probably even more beers. And we decided that whatever happens, we pick one by the end of the weekend. And we sat all day discussing all kinds of cool things, music, food, whatever. And then late night, probably after a few beers, Dan said, what about HR? And then we all laughed and it's like, Dan, seriously. But then he kind of laid out the idea in a very simple way, said, you look at marketing, you have a funnel that says acquisition, growth, retention. The marketing manager have changed from your madman style like this to the sort of data-centric CMO. And in the people part of the business, you have the same funnel. We just call it recruiting, growth, and retention. Everyone's focused on recruiting, no one on the rest. And the HR manager look more like madmen than the modern CMO. So why don't we build something there? Also based on our experience going from small company to big company, we've seen a lot of things inside Citrix. So we got up the next morning and wrote a business plan on a piece of paper. Essentially, the only thing we had was the management team and an idea. And 6 years later, we sold the company for 700+ million to Workday. We were 300 people, 250, 300 people, 5 countries, 3 continents, and had grown to, I can't remember the number, but probably about a couple of years later, we hit like 100 million ARR. So relatively quick growth. So obviously that sounds extremely linear, and I mean obviously recommend going to summer houses, but there's been a lot of hoops and loops and whatever have you in between of this story. But I think one of the strengths of Peakon was obviously that we had a more or less full leadership team in the beginning. I think I brought a couple of slides just quickly. I can share my screen here if that's all right.
Yeah, please do. And when you're doing that, I mean, it would be interesting to kind of hear your thoughts around if there were some learnings from the Podio journey to Peakon journey, and if there's some differences or something that you improved there along the way in terms of the topic as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, lots of learnings, and there was also learnings that we thought, like one of them, maybe before I dive into this, but one of the learnings was that we thought, because Podio was an amazing culture. I think if you ask everyone that worked at Podio back then, they'd never found anything like it since. And we thought, great culture. We know how to do that. We got that covered.
Yeah.
The problem is that that's not how culture works.
Yeah.
It has to be built every time. We all got like 5 years older. We started having kids, we couldn't solve everything at the local pub anymore. So,
right.
it ended up being quite a different ride. I think we had an amazing culture at Peakon, but it was definitely different than Podio. And I think to some degree, when you read and hear about culture, it is extremely hard to program, but it can definitely be stimulated. And culture, as you grow in the early days, you can kind of control it. You are the guy on the what do you call you can stand on a chair and sort of get everyone in on it. But at some point, the culture has to live in the people in the organization, and that transition can be quite hard. So definitely one learning around culture, which we thought we were good at, but realized that we had to learn how to do not all over again. One of the other learnings was definitely that of course there was a little bit of cheating in Peakon versus Podio. I mean, we had an easier time raising the first money, of course, and a few things like that. The other thing was that we have seen what happens when you start scaling. Podio wasn't particularly big, but I think we scaled it to like 100 people, but still a lot of learning for us. And one of the things particularly Christian did in the beginning was to just start doing a lot of the small things right. I mean, we did the GDPR long before GDPR. We made sure we had a proper contract from day one and a good shareholders agreement and a data room and all these like little things that when at least you do it first time, it's like yeah fine, we'll do it later. The problem is that it becomes so much harder to do it later, and you sit in an investment meeting or whatever, and they ask for the data room, you don't really have it, and your budget isn't really tight, or your shareholders agreement is sort of you pick the cheap lawyer and so forth. And I think that actually mattered a lot more than we thought. Like, because the problem with scaling is that it creates a lot of noise, and the more you can reduce the noise, the better it gets. I could keep going, but I hope that added a little bit.
Yeah. So you're much more prepared with Peakon on that.
Obviously, yeah. So maybe just very quickly, I don't want to sort of bore you with everything, but this was the 4 guys initially. So Phil, who was leading product and strategy, of course. Dan was coming from marketing. Christian was the CTO, and I kind of did all the commercial stuff, and some operations and what have you. And that meant that we could pretty much sort of get going day one with the founder team. We actually started up with no CEO, so we were just four leaders. We were very experimental. The initial team, I mean, this is before offsites was popular. Now, obviously, it's totally yesterday. But yeah, in the early days of when people started doing this, we invited the employees to write the employee handbook, holiday policies, all of that. So we did actually a lot of experimentation in the beginning on the organizational part of building a company, because we thought it was interesting. And one of them was clearly that when we hit about 20 people, we realized that no CEO is that doesn't work. An organization needs someone to look at for a little period of time. Phil and I was co-CEO, but Phil became the CEO and did a great job at that. And that obviously was the kind of first bigger transition. The next transition was to then sort of build the leadership team. Maybe the first guy we hired here was Neil Ryland, our CRO, which to a large degree was completely transformative for Peakon. Neil has a motto that is whatever it takes, and he really means it. He's your real sales guy, British guy. He's fantastic, great values. But he was a very expensive hire. We were like 16 people out of Copenhagen. And we tried to hire people in Denmark, but they were all too complacent Danish salespeople that wanted to go home at 4:00 and would prefer 90% in base and no commission. And so we ended up going to the UK because we needed a higher ambition level on hiring. And came across Neil. Neil had been CRO at Huddle, which was maybe not competing, but similar company to Podio, but in my mind, a lot less good of a product. But they did really well commercially. So I was like, Neil, if you can sell that, you can sell many things. And we had a fantastic breakfast that ended up in lunch. And Neil came on board and remember, he joined one of our offsites, and Neil always wears a white shirt and a suit, and the rest of us was like in hoodies and a couch, and it was a complete cultural clash of your like product people meeting proper sales people. And what actually happened was we did these offsites like once a quarter in our chairman's actually Tommy. He had a bigger summer house, so we went there, and then we ran out of space, so we had to figure out what do we do next in terms of offsite. And in order to fund it, we agreed that let's say we hit Q1 or whatever the quarter was, everyone gets a pizza. If we do 10% more than our target, we bring London to Copenhagen or vice versa, and we do a party. And if we do 30% more than target, we bring the entire team to Barcelona. And we knew that the only way we could get to Barcelona and get to target was to go more enterprise, which meant that the product team really needed to work together with the sales team. And I think it was honestly a little bit random, but it completely changed from this usual siloed company where you have sales just demanding product and product saying that sales sells all kinds of shit that we don't actually have yet, which I'm sure someone can recognize. The next hire was Simone. Simone had been at King Again, we looked in Denmark, couldn't find anyone good enough, ended up looking in London, found Simone. She's taken King from 100 people to 2,000. She knew what good was looking like and initially said no, and I chased her for a month or two, and at the end we convinced her to say yes. So she joined, and again back to this whole thing of having sort of your pencil house in order. That Simone definitely helped with. I then obviously went on to the COO, obviously, but I went on to sort of COO, and we hired Patrick as VP product. And at some point, those two merged, and Patrick took the CEO, and I actually ended up in the US to open our US business, which we were lucky with because we had 4 founders, so we could still bring the sort of founder mentality without sacrificing the home base. So that was kind of that part. And obviously, at some point, we started hiring more VPs and stuff like that. But we actually kept like a relatively slim C-level in the early days.
So one question that came to mind is when you're looking at for what you're looking for in the different roles, is the cross-department collaboration something that you guys kind of really fostered along the way, and that you were looking for in the people that you wanted to hire, or was it something that kind of came naturally, was somehow emergent from the types of people that you hired?
I think we hired people that had that value. So while Neil is like the most sales guy ever, Neil is also a very loyal, collaborative sales guy. I'm not saying that other sales guys are bad, but he was a company's man, and I think that, and so was Simone, and so was Patrick, and I think so to some degree we still managed to create this culture. We talked a lot about, and I've asked a lot of founders later on, like, what do you wish you would have done differently from kind of 0 to 100 people? And many times the answer is, I wish I would have kept the leadership team together for longer. Meaning that as you start growing up, in the beginning, it doesn't really, I mean, you're a small team, everyone knows each other, but as soon as you start putting the first middle layer in, you start creating silos, and you start creating distance from you to the individual contributors, and that what was I supposed to say? And that sometimes means that, you know, if you run division X, product or marketing or sales or whatever, you as a leader start worrying more about your team than the company, right? So to have this kind of first team principle as a leadership team, we spent actually quite a lot of time also doing offsite meeting. Like, we were in different locations, but spent both time and money on getting people physically together, which obviously have not been sort of possible or very popular in recent years. But I'm a big believer in humans and what humans create together. And typically, when humans know humans, that becomes better. Of course, we have Slack and all of those things, but the fact that there's most people are not particularly good at writing and less people are good at reading, at least the intent.
Exactly right. And I feel like in our portfolio companies as well, we've seen it over and over again, how when you start bringing these department heads, they in the beginning, if you're kind of an early stage first time founder, it's easy to go in or step in the mine of having people kind of sub-optimize their own silo, their own department, and not the whole company, kind of not seeing the whole picture. And that's kind of, I feel like, is something that you should be very, very careful about when you're hiring people, that they do really understand that they're not there to create the best marketing kind of department. They're there to create success for the business. They're there to help everybody become better and help the company succeed as a whole, and not just as the marketing department kind of doing.
And it's a lot easier said than done, to be honest, because then you
100%.
spread in different locations and you do all kinds of things. But I think whatever money you spend on bringing the leadership team physically together is always well spent. The other thing I care a lot for, and we spend quite a bit of time on, is operating mechanisms. I think they are highly underestimated. Operating mechanisms mean like, what is the sort of cadence of your company? So simple example is you have a board meeting probably 4 or 5 times a year. What happens before the board meeting, right? Like what is so we would plan it so that we would have, management offsite, call it 3 weeks before the board meeting. That would allow us to do the strategy. Typically, that would be after we did our quarterly forecasts. Then we would have time to prep and put the ideas from the offsite into the board presentation. So we came as kind of one team into a board meeting. We would have the board meeting get the approvals we needed, and we would have a plan for like an all hands following the board meeting. And then, that kind of, so it was all the same material we prepared for all those different events. I way too often see people going, oh shit, we have a board meeting, we prepare board material, and then, we have an offsite, we do offsite material, we have an all hands, we do all hands material. And you end up producing everything many times, and then you end up outsourcing it, which is one of the sort of small things that fosters a bit of this silo things, right? So I think you can actually, by simple planning, do a lot of this.
Yeah, makes sense. There was a question by Panu here asking about like what are kind of the profiles that you're looking for when you're hiring for CEO, CTO, CXO, but rather than going into, I think those can be fairly specific, but perhaps a little bit more on the kind of overall kind of more broadly thinking about the qualities that you're looking for when you're hiring for these leadership roles. Like what are the main things that you are really concerned about? And is it, I know it's hard to kind of prioritize these things. In an optimal case, you want both, but are you looking for more of a culture fit, or how much do you value kind of raw skill to some extent, or raw talent, or experience in that sense?
I mean, obviously, there's many ways of looking at this, and I think we've all done our mistakes. In general, I think one of the things we've been lucky with throughout our companies is to hire good leadership. That doesn't mean that everyone has been right, but as you can hear, I think without Neil, without Simone, Peakon would have been a different story. In my current work, I've just been part of hiring a new CEO in normative, and which has been a great process. So I think it's always cool with people that know what's around the next corner, particularly when you are fast growing. So I wish I had an actual graph of it, but essentially what happens when you have a company, so you start whatever, we were 4 people or 10 people or whatever, and you grow, and obviously not everyone's growing really fast, but in the case that you are growing really fast, you're growing up. So if you have the axis as employee counts and then time out here, so then initially you hire individual contributors. Then they turn into heads off, then they turn into directors, they turn into VPs, and potentially C-level, right? But if you grow really fast from, say, our Christmas parties were 11 people, 22, 65, 165, 265, something like that. So it's basically a new company run every year. But it also means that people were then that started as an individual contributor, then 9 months later, they were head off, then they were director, then they were, in a normal world, it takes you 10 plus years to develop the skill set of being a director. But in these things, you have to grow really fast. So if the company growth is this, sometimes your leaders' growth are not as steep as your company's growth. And this is why you start getting this. So you usually have like the difference between the company growth and your leaders' sort of growth. That's the hard part. So therefore, we always try to hire someone that was above the company's curve, we found, I remember, a great CFO at the time, but he had only managed a company that was kind of, I can't remember, like say 80 people when we were 40 people, and we were like, that's fine, but like in a year's time we will surpass that, and then we don't have anyone that knows what good looks like after that. And I think it's important, that challenge of hiring those is that then the difference between your C-level team and your next level leadership typically grows, because it grows like that over time. And that's the gap that stresses leadership teams. Like then it's like, it's better I do it myself. So once you have the C-level team in place, then the important part is to build the next layer, and then it obviously continues. But I think people, they sometimes stop when they have a great C-level team, but you end up stressing them out because
And how much did you then kind of actually internally develop talent into leadership roles?
We did a lot, like most startups do, right? Like you have people developing from one to another, and a few like have developed and are still there. And we have been super fortunate with amazing people all the way along. But we also at some point hired like a great VP customer success, and that changed customer success and so forth, right? So I think it's obviously a continuous battle. So I think having someone that's seen what's around the next corner, but not corporate. I have still to find a positive story of hiring someone that comes sort of straight from big corporate for long term. And then I think it needs to be someone that can be company first. If all the interviews is like that's always a little bit of a not so cool. Back to the other part. And then I like values, and I like people that are very adamant and explicit around their values, because it's very easy to manage around. Your team knows what to expect. You have that drive. So I find that's really strong. And obviously they need to be smart and whatever, all the usual stuff, energetic, and the salary needs to work and whatever stuff. But
right. But I suppose you'd rather kind of have somebody develop within the company into those positions, as opposed to perhaps bringing somebody from the outside into those roles.
I've never had a C-level from within. We've always hired them from the outside.
Okay,
we deliberately hired them from the outside because I think they added another ambition level to the company.
Right.
So for every time we hired a C-level person, they added another gear to the company.
Right. And that's what you were looking for.
And I think sometimes people hire C-level too early. That's the other part of it. Like we were 4 founders, so therefore we were sort of C-level. But when I see people hiring like a COO or whatever, CFO, when you are 8 people, you probably hired the wrong person. Like I don't know any super strong CFOs that want to join like an 8-people team. So I think, and the problem with that is then maybe you hire them as a director or a VP instead, and you see if they can grow, and if not, you can hire someone above and everything is good. But it's very hard to tell people that you are no longer C-level, now you are director, because we found someone that's better than you. So while VCs, no offense, Timo, sometimes just look at the title and say, oh, you have very experienced team. I remember at Normative, where I've been chairman for a while, I deliberately hired a leadership team first, or management team first, and then a leadership team later on, like with C-level. So initially we didn't hire C-level, but it was very experienced people we had as director of this and that and manager of so. But all the VCs are really junior team, but just because we didn't label them C-level like all the rest. So sometimes this stupid world creates a little bit of self-infliction, but take titles serious.
Yeah. So to your point, like kind of hiring early on, or perhaps sometimes you hire C-level too early. I mean, you were able to get Phil to join at Podio already very early on. What do you think and I guess Anders wanted to join as well from you said Spotify. I guess he was from.
Yeah.
So what do you think really, if they were here and they're telling kind of their reasoning behind joining a really early stage startup that and a group of or a bunch of founders that nobody ever heard of, what was behind their thought process there with their background after all? What do you think?
I would like to believe it was the people and the vision, because it wasn't the salary.
Exactly.
But I think there is some truth to that, and obviously that the case makes sense, right? Like there's a logic there's a business case there, or whatever you say. Like you invest your time and capital into it. So hiring C-level is a sales job. It's not a hiring job. I think that's very important.
Yeah.
You don't want the one that haven't got a job for the last year and just need one.
Exactly. But I think that's one thing that many obviously struggle with, being early stage founders, being in a very unknown company, and being able to attract those kinds of really, let's say, rock stars that have an experience and that can take the company to another level. And like you said, that was kind of the whole let's say red line on how you were able to hire kind of above your weight constantly, and people were able to elevate the company constantly the more people you brought in the leadership team. But that's always kind of a difficult position. But maybe some thoughts around how were you successful in that with Peakon and also Podio in terms of kind of attracting the right kinds of people who are perhaps more experienced or let's say perhaps not specifically for your stage, but a little bit you were kind of punching above your weight at that point.
Yeah. I mean, it was maybe a little bit of a different time, so there was less startups.
Okay.
So we were lucky, but honestly, I think sometimes it's about aiming high enough. Like I'm not entirely sure that it's like the truth that senior people doesn't want to be part of the next big thing if they get the right opportunity. But I do think it sometimes becomes a little bit self-reinforcing if you're like, we don't have. I've seen quite a few teams where in hindsight I would probably have told them, instead of hiring the two sort of medium good leaders you did, I would have spent all the money on one good one. But obviously it's a lot easier to say in hindsight. But it's back to the fact that it's a sales job, right? Like you have to sell that vision, and you have to sell the culture and the people, and I mean obviously the opportunity also.
That makes sense. Guys, if you have any questions, please fire them away in the chat, and we'll bring those up. Now is the time for you guys to also, if you have any questions related to this and the topic of kind of leadership team evolution over time from the early founder-led teams to like much larger organizations, then please fire away. We can then take those on in the remaining 10 minutes here. I had a couple of questions related to kind of your view on what's going on in the world in terms of AI kind of transforming some parts of the organization quite strongly. But how do you see there's much influence in terms of changing the playbooks, what worked previously to what works or what will work in the future, considering that AI is able to handle a lot of, or not a lot, but some parts of the go-to-market kind of departments, jobs, and perhaps on the product side as well, and obviously also in the support side. But is there something that you think is relevant in terms of what AI is bringing to the table when you're thinking about the leadership team and its evolution? What do you need to somehow bring that thought process into hiring your leadership positions as well? Well, any thoughts around that?
Very good question. I think making a comment on what's going on in the world in general today is probably that's probably a little bit wild at the moment. So I'll refrain from that. But in terms of AI and leadership teams, I mean, it's obviously clear that AI is going to change a lot of things. It's, as I said, we built no code back then at Podio, but we were still like hard coding everything, and it took us a year to build like a common thread, which you can now do at Lovable in like 40 seconds or something like that. So
Right.
the speed of innovation, and I think in general, we've had I currently have a food bio fund where we invest in a lot of things, but there's still a lot of product risk. Whereas, like if I look at SaaS, it has become increasingly execution risk, right? Like it's basically an execution game because it's so easy to build.
Yeah,
so easy, but it's become increasingly easy to build. So it becomes more and more of an execution game, and then it's obviously great that we can automate marketing, we can automate sales. The only thing is that everyone is going to do it. So I guess there's this dimensions on AI, which is like there's a substitution thing, like what workflows are AI going to substitute in your company today, which is going to be a lot, like obviously customer interactions, analysis, automated sales, marketing, so forth, and a lot of workflows and design, and you know it better than me. But I guess there's also like an abstraction level, right? Like are we just substituting what's today and then moving up on a higher abstraction layer? And I think we need to some degree, because if you're doing exactly the same as you're doing today, just with AI, everyone else is going to do that as well. So you need to find leaders that are not only able to see a vision that is AI substituting workflows today, but also see a vision of increasing your abstraction layer on top of AI, meaning you still need to be creative to stand out from the crowd. Like you probably all have a million LinkedIn messages from a lot of bots asking you for a meeting, and I'm not particularly sure that that's the way forward for humanity or SaaS companies. Yeah. So you still need to do something that stands out, but clearly in terms of hiring, I think there's a lot of the organization you don't need to hire, where I'm not entirely sure it's all gonna be fallout in the leadership team. I think it's more your sort of mid low level IC, so you could keep a much slimmer company than you used to be, which means you have less managers and so forth. So I don't have a crystal ball. I'm way in. I'm occasionally amused by the fact that everyone's claiming SaaS is dead. I fully understand what they mean by the statement, or at least the version of SaaS that I come from is dead, where you have to build and hard code everything. But being one that have tried a lot of AI tools lately, they are all software as a service. So I think SaaS is dead, but it's never been bigger than it is now, and we probably will SaaSify even physical objects with AI, which has been really hard with kind of the first version of SaaS. So yeah, again, I think there's all the opportunities, and there's I don't think not having leadership teams are going to be a thing right now.
Exactly. People are saying SaaS is dead, but I think they forget the long live SaaS afterwards that you're supposed to say.
You have to remember that SaaS is a business model.
Yeah.
SaaS, software as a service, a business model, as opposed to having it on premise. That was the invention back then. Yep. And that is still the invention, right?
Yeah. Hey, there's one question here in terms of the culture fit with the management or leadership hires. So how have you been able to ensure that there is the culture fit when you're doing the hires? And is there any cases where you can say that it didn't work out? And did you? Yeah, maybe you can mention those, and it'll help us kind of understand it a little bit in terms of how you think about it. And how do you make sure that the culture fit is there already at the interview phase?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's nowadays sort of popular to talk about culture addition or culture. It's not culture fit. It's like I come from a
Right.
company in HR. If I said
Yeah.
culture fit there, I would have had my head chopped off. But I fully understand what you mean, that it's a people that are able to enter the group and positively add to it and not divide it. And for me, it has meant that sometimes we have hired not necessarily the odd ones, because it's not, but maybe not the polished choice. And I think sometimes when we gone from someone that where CV wise was too perfect, or or too corporate for that matter, it feels harder. So the first thing is like integrating corporate to. I worked with amazing people that came from corporate, but it is a hard journey for both sides. I think when you have a leadership team that has a very, very high ambition level, and you add someone that doesn't match, that I've also seen giving a little bit of friction. So I think you need to, just because it's number 3 or 4 you're adding to the leadership team, it shouldn't just be someone that can now sit in a corner. You should always aim for the one that's better than everyone else. And I know it's like too easy to say, but I do think it matters, because it's like a football team or whatever, like people or the ice hockey team you talked about, right? That there is A players foster A players and so forth, right? And you kind of, if you put someone in that's a little better than yourself, you become a little bit better yourself. So it may be back to the first point of today when I talked about hiring a CEO that was better than myself. I usually say, if I'm not out of this role by Christmas, I have not done my job well enough. And I think that principle is kind of so. I ran whatever and hired someone that always was better than me. As a founder, I usually use the analogy, and it's obviously not particularly uplifting, but you are basically a guy strapping yourself to the train rails, and then you put like a venture train behind you, and that train just keeps running faster and faster. So if you don't learn how to run and faster, you get run over. And I think the only way to do that is to surround yourself with better and better people.
Mm-hmm.
So you can almost look at it as a defense strategy if you
Right.
want to keep your job.
Right. Exactly right. Thank you. Hey, Kasper, I think we're running out of time here, and thank you everybody for joining here. Is there somehow that we can follow you, or do you have any kind of social media presence or something like that where you try to kind of share your thoughts and your
I've no, not really, to be honest. I'm
okay.
on LinkedIn. You can see what we're doing at Future 5, which is my current gig, where we invest in stuff for the next generation, focused on climate, food, and education. And I think there's a newsletter there where you can follow.
Yep.
I'm not particularly good at writing. Maybe I can get AI to do it one day, but then you don't want to read it. So maybe whatever. I'm on LinkedIn. Follow around. Like I hope that some of the bad choices we've made could inspire you to make some better ones in the future.
Absolutely, and I know that there are some of your talks already on YouTube, which people can go through and kind of get more insight into the story that's behind Podio and Peakon. So that might be interesting for people to take a look at. But just as a summary, I mean, I just wrote down a few things here along the way that when you were talking that we should be mindful of. First of all, is you have to raise the bar with each person. Each person needs to be a very much an addition and an uplift to the team when you hire them, and preferably you get the small things right early on, which you mentioned was very useful and transformational for Peakon. You get the documents, agreements, financials, all of these in the proper order, and don't use the cheapest lawyer to do that either. So you get somebody who actually knows what they're or has been through the journey and can help you there. And early on you can control the culture as the founding team, but then it starts to evolve as you bring more people along, and it really evolves in the people that you hire, and kind of culture becomes additive, and that's what you're getting, and that's what you're hiring for, and not only for culture fit there. And a good idea is for the leadership team to actually be very useful is to bring the leadership team together so that they can develop, they can work together, and that way not only create silos and kind of optimize solutions, but actually help the whole company to evolve and reach greater heights that way. And then hire company first people that are very, very explicit in terms of the values that they are following, that they want to uphold. And finally, it's a really, when you're hiring people, it's really a sales job to get those more advanced people to join the line who can actually raise the bar once again for your whole company. So those are kind of the things that I underlined. Anything else that you want to add, or are we good with that?
Sounds good.
Yeah, very good. Hey, thank you so much, Kasper, and thanks for joining. Thanks for taking the time, and thanks everybody for joining along. And you can find this conversation, this webinar in YouTube later on, and you'll get it in your emails as well as a recording. But thank you all, and we'll be seeing you in the next one. Thank you, Kasper.
Thank you very much.
Bye.